Hey everybody, Hoosier Jedi here with another review for you. This time I'm talking episodes 1 and 2 of Star Wars Rebels, which collectively makes up a story called Spark of Rebellion. And overall, I did like this story. It's a little simplistic, but then again, it's a pilot episode, and the thing with pilot episodes is that they're generally generally designed to be big, fat info dump episodes. And they're basically there to trot out all the big characters, give us enough of an idea of what's going on with them that we start to feel some affection. We start to care about the characters, and to also start setting up some of the major plots. And a lot always hinges on these episodes. And overall, I have to say these two episodes work really well. I also particularly like the title, "A Spark of Rebellion." It reminds me of a story from the Star Wars comics called "A Spark Remains," which, like Kanan, is a story about a Jedi who survived Order 66 and is out there trying to still do some good. Now, for those people who are kind of wondering about this in continuity, basically, if for people who aren't clear on the whole situation, Disney, when they came in after buying Star Wars, they basically, I don't want to say chucked everything out the window. I prefer to say that most of what was considered Star Wars canon got promoted to, let's go with the term, soft canon. Or as I prefer to think of it, it's all canon until it's not. Now, what the stuff that is firmly 100% canon are, of course, the movies, the previous Star Wars Clone Wars TV series, and a novel by John Jackson Miller called A New Dawn that came out, I believe it was last month, that kind of focused on basically how Kanan and Hera met. Now, normally Star Wars novels are not considered hard canon, but given that they're sort of rebooting Star Wars in preparation for the new movie that is movies that are starting to get made now, it was explicitly stated that this particular novel was indeed 100% canon. I've read the novel. It's actually quite good. John Jackson Miller is one of my favorite Star Wars writers. I loved his work on the Knights of the Old Republic comic and Star Wars Knight Errant. He really is a fantastic Star Wars writer. And that novel, if you haven't read it, is basically the story of how Kanan and Hera met up, and how the little family that we see here on Rebels got its start. And it certainly is interesting to see these characters after having read the novel, simply because, one, the show's on Disney, so they kind of have to tone down certain elements of it all. For example, Kanan in the novel, it makes it quite clear that he spent a lot of his time, to put it bluntly, drinking and womanizing, while Hera is very much interested in hunting up and finding people who could be potential revolutionaries. So, that kind of gives you an idea of where these two characters do come from, and a little bit about what's going on underneath the surface with them. So, since I brought that up, let's kind of just talk briefly about our characters here. Now, Kanan, the novel also does reveal certain details about his past that I'm not going to go into here, simply because I'm pretty sure they'll probably bring it up on the show, and I don't want to spoil some of the things that are very cool. But he's an interesting character. We don't really get to see him fleshed out in a great detail, since they only do have an hour to work with, and there's a lot for them to do. Which is why I'm glad I was able to read the novel beforehand, where we could get into his head much more. But he does show himself here and in the novel to be, a clever and resourceful guy with an amusing sense of humor, but also somebody who's carrying some real pain. Hera also shown to be a very smart, very, very capable lady. She spends basically the whole of this episode on the ship, but she can handle herself just fine outside the ship. So she's no slacker in the action department. And it does also kind of really drive home that she's very serious about wanting to find people who are willing to put themselves on the line for the greater good of the galaxy. Zeb. Now, his design is actually, as the design of his species is, as a lot of you might know, actually based on the original designs for Chewbacca. Of course, he's also voiced by Stephen Bloom, who's done, so basically like the most famous male voice actor in America. Just an endless list of credits. He's done so much stuff. He's done plenty of Star Wars before. He was even one of the Sith Inquisitor companions in Star Wars: The Old Republic. Let me see what else. But again, not a lot to say about Zeb as a character so far. He's just basically, so far, just the gruff guy who's really a pretty nice person underneath it all. Sabine, I'm trying to really kind of figure out what's going on with her. Particularly the fact that in some scenes she looks like she has a normal human sort of skin tone, and other times her skin tone looks kind of yellowish, which is really weirding me out. But that just might be who knows what. Now it is kind of in the past that Mandalorians would recruit people from other species to join the Mandalorians, but this was back thousands of years before anything, and that stuff may or may not be canon right now. So it's possible she might not be entirely human, because that's basically what Mandalorians are, is just a branch of humanity. So now it has been noted that the design on her mask is actually very similar to Bo-Katan from Clone Wars War. So there might be a possible relation there. And I forgot to mention that, speaking of possible relations, that Hera's last name is meant to be Syndulla, which was the name of one of the Twi'lek rebel leaders that we saw on Ryloth in Clone Wars. And if I'm understanding the age of the character right, then Hera probably would have been a young teenager at the time that happened. So, it is entirely possible she could be related to that character. Oh, and I also kind of forgot to mention that Vanessa Marshall, who does the voice of Hera, has done Star Wars work before. She was the voice of Jan Ors in Dark Forces Saga, and she was also the voice of Black Widow in some recent Avengers animation. Let's see, moving on. Nothing really to say about Chopper. That particular droid didn't really have much going on this episode. Ezra, as I was reading some of people's comments about it, and somebody made a really good point that he looks an awful lot like Aladdin. And the sort of street urchin thing that he has going on, again, very reminiscent of Aladdin. Also reminiscent of what was for many years in the previous Star Wars canon, the official backstory of Han Solo, where he spent some part of years of his life as a street kid on Corellia. So again, it is just basically meant to show that he's a clever, resourceful guy with an ultimately good heart, and that's all well and good. As I said, the level of characterization for a story like this, where they're just starting off, is it's just not possible for it to be terribly deep. It's just sort of meant to give us the very, very broad strokes of a character, so we can begin to start getting attached to them and getting an idea in our heads of what they're like. And it's just the nature of the beast, so I can't really hold that as a genuine mark against the show. Nothing particular to say about Agent Callus. Yeah, I am a little worried that they're just going to go for the standard thing, that there is very little depth to the Imperials, that they're all just straight up bad guys, while in the previous Star Wars canon, there's a lot of time devoted to showing that not everybody who worked for the Empire was bad. A lot of people were just genuinely good people who were misled, or people who had been raised in a system with a terrible and corrupt view, and a lot of their journey was often them realizing, like, no, I can't continue to go along with this. This is wrong. And of course, this episode we see Callus just murder a stormtrooper just because the guy annoyed him. So, no great hopes for Agent Callus doing any sort of soul searching about his place in the galaxy. Now, we of course also do very briefly get to see the big bad of the series, which is the Inquisitor, voiced by the one and only Jason Isaacs, best known, of course, as Lucius Malfoy in the Harry Potter movies, but also a guy with previous Star Wars work under his belt as the voice of Tiber Zam, a sort of basically a Jabba the Hutt level intergalactic crime boss in the Star Wars universe, who was even looked kind of like Jason Isaacs. So having him come in again, really great stuff. And of course, Jason Isaacs has done voiceover work before, like on Avatar: The Last Airbender in the first season, where he was the voice of Admiral Zhao. So let's talk about a little bit more about this sort of connections to other Star Wars stuff out there. One thing that I noticed is when that unlucky stormtrooper that got killed by Agent Callus got knocked off the balcony by the first time, we got to hear him give a Wilhelm scream. And if you're familiar with Hollywood traditions, you know what one of those are. And they did have a stormtrooper falling and giving out a Wilhelm scream in the original trilogy. I can't remember which movie it was, though. I think it might have actually been the original Star Wars movie, now that I think about it. Of course, we get a guest appearance by Obi-Wan Kenobi, which is really just beyond cool. We get to see a holocron, and I love holocrons. I love holocrons and what they can do in the greater Star Wars lore, where they're sort of like repositories of Jedi knowledge, and that they tend to have these sort of personalities of Jedi imprinted on them. But holocrons have also been shown to do other things, like the Kuiper holocron, for example, had a list of all the potential Force-sensitive children the Jedi were trying to recruit, and this was part of a storyline on the Clone Wars series when it got stolen by Cad Bane. So it appears that holocrons have a little bit more of a broad definition of what exactly they are than was traditionally played out in the expanded universe. And of course, if you listen carefully, you can even hear some beats of classic Star Wars music. One thing, like at the very end, that I love, where Kanan explains to Ezra what the Force is. Well, he's basically quoting almost word for word Yoda in Empire Strikes Back, which of course makes sense because the timeline works that Kanan would have been a student at the Jedi Temple and would have almost certainly had classes and lessons from Yoda. So again, really, really nice touch there. And there were probably some other things that were thrown in there that I kind of missed, but you can only get so much on your first glance, and the episode did only wrap up not even an hour and a half ago. Didn't do the video immediately because I wanted to watch Z Nation. So let me see here. Anything else that I wanted to talk about? Oh yeah. When they go to the planet, they end up in that shanty town where all those people are just sitting there all miserable and starving and stuff. And it's mentioned that the place is called Tarkin Town. Now, if you don't know your American history, you'd probably be lost on you that just after the Great Depression, there was basically a shanty town set up in Central Park in New York City that was called Hooverville, as a way of basically kind of giving the finger to President Herbert Hoover, who at the time a lot of people blamed for the Great Depression and the stock market crash that caused it, which from what we know from reviewing historical records since is actually pretty unfair. That it really wasn't Hoover's fault, and the whole thing kind of happened just as he was about to leave office anyway. But when things go wrong, blame it on the president, even if it isn't his fault, is a grand old American tradition. And let's see. No, I can't really think of too much else to say about this. Just that I am very intrigued by some of the changes to the Stormtrooper armor. A lot of people who've seen those have been speculating that this is kind of their way, even though it takes place before the original trilogy movies, that they're going to be drawing upon this to go with the Stormtrooper designs that we're going to see in the new Star Wars movies, which honestly doesn't make 100% sense, but hey, whatever, right? Continuity has never exactly been Star Wars' strongest suit. But anyway, at the end of the day, is this story good? Are these episodes good? And the answer is a resounding yes. It does suffer from the problem of it's a pilot. They've got to get a lot of information out there. They've got to get a lot of characters out there in front of us, and they're not going to have the time to go into them very deeply. But in terms of giving us everything that we need to get this show off the ground, to give us characters that we're going to like and care about, and to do the all-important thing of tuning in again next week, then this show succeeds admirably. I was extraordinarily disappointed when Clone Wars got the chop the way it did. But, them's the breaks. But we've got a new Star Wars show, it's canon, and it looks like it's gonna be really good. So, water under the bridge, folks. Let's move on. Let's enjoy it. We are looking at a revival of Star Wars on a level that is almost unimaginable to people who have been Star Wars fans for a long time. So, be happy, folks. This is a good time to be a Star Wars fan. And with that said, folks, I'm going to call it here. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter @HoosierJedi. Until next time, take care and have a good one.